I made more money than I ever thought possible, and I did it by solving problems that most people said were impossible to solve. But you know what? Making money and keeping money are two very different games. And I've watched brilliant people, hardworking people, people who do everything right, get trapped in patterns that keep them stuck in the middle class forever. Not because they're not smart enough, not because they don't work hard enough, but because they fall into traps that are specifically designed to keep them there. I'm going to tell you something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. The biggest scam of the 21st century isn't some elaborate Ponzi scheme or a corrupt Wall Street conspiracy. It's the lie that's been sold to an entire generation about education and credentials. And I say this as someone who has a PhD from Berkeley, who spent years in academia, who absolutely believes in the power of knowledge. But what's happening right now in America is non-education. It's financial slavery dressed up in a cap and gown. Let me paint you a picture. There's a kid, 18 years old, smart, hardworking, first in their family to go to college. They get accepted to a decent school. Not Harvard, not MIT, just a regular state university. And everyone tells them this is their ticket out. This is how you make it. So they sign on the dotted line. They take out $50,000, $60,000, sometimes $80,000 in student loans. And here's the kicker. They're 18 years old. They can't legally buy a beer, but we're letting them sign up for debt that will follow them for the next 20 or 30 years of their life. 4 years later, they graduate. They've got their degree in hand, and they're proud. Their family is proud. Everyone's taking pictures. And then reality hits. They start job hunting, and they realize that their degree in communications or sociology or general business, the one they just spent $80,000 on, qualifies them for a job that pays $35,000 or $40,000 a year. Do the math with me here. If they're making $40,000 a year and they got $80,000 in student loans at 6% interest, their monthly payment is going to be around $900 for 10 years. That's almost $11,000 a year just in loan payments. They're taking home maybe $30,000 after taxes, paying $11,000 in loans, and they've got $19,000 left to live on. That's $1,600 a month for rent, food, transportation, everything. This isn't a path to the middle class. This is a trap. And it's not an accident. The universities know exactly what they're doing. They've increased tuition by over 250% in the last 30 years, while the quality of education, in many cases, has actually declined. They've built luxury dorms and recreation centers and administrative buildings, and they've passed every single dollar of that cost onto students. And the students can't say no, because they've been told their entire lives that without a degree, they're worthless. That's the trap. Make something seem essential, make it unaffordable, offer easy credit. And boom, you've got a customer base that can't escape. I hired hundreds of people at Renaissance Technologies over the years, some of the smartest minds in mathematics and physics and computer science. And you know what I learned? The people who succeeded weren't the ones with the most impressive degrees from the fanciest schools. They were the ones who could think critically, who could solve problems, who were relentlessly curious. I hired people from state schools who ran circles around Ivy League graduates because they had practical skills and real hunger. The credential was just a piece of paper. What mattered was what they could actually do. Here's what nobody tells you. There are fields where credentials matter. If you want to be a doctor, you need medical school. If you want to be an engineer working on bridges or aircraft, you need that engineering degree. Those credentials are gatekeepers to professions with real barriers to entry and high salaries that justify the investment. But we've created this mythology that every degree is valuable, that it doesn't matter what you study as long as you get that piece of paper. That's a lie that's making universities rich and students poor. I meet young people all the time who are crushed under student debt. 28 years old, can't buy a house, can't start a business, can't even think about starting a family because they've got this anchor around their neck. And they're angry. They should be angry. They were sold a defective product. They were told that education was an investment that always pays off. But investments have to generate returns greater than their costs. That's Finance 101. If I put $100,000 into something and it generates $40,000 of value, I didn't invest. I lost $60,000. And here's the really insidious part. This debt is different from any other debt. You can't discharge it in bankruptcy. It follows you forever. Miss payments, and it destroys your credit. Default, and they'll garnish your wages. The system is designed to make sure you pay no matter what happens to your life. You could lose your job, get sick, have a family emergency, doesn't matter. That payment is due. I've seen people in their 50s still paying off student loans from degrees they got 30 years ago. That's not education. That's indentured servitude. No, I'm not saying don't get educated. I'm saying be smart about it. If you're going to take on debt for education, make sure the return justifies the investment. Look at the actual starting salaries in your field. Calculate what your loan payments will be. Run the numbers before you sign anything. And consider alternatives. Community college for 2 years, then transfer. State schools instead of private universities. Trade skills that are in high demand. Online learning for skills like coding, where employers care about what you can do, not where you learned it. There are brilliant self-taught programmers making six figures who never spent $1 on formal computer science education. They learned from free resources, built projects, created portfolios, and got hired based on demonstrable skills. The credentials trap works because it preys on hope and fear. Hope that education will transform your life. Fear that without credentials you'll be left behind. But the people getting rich off this system, the university administrators, the loan servicers, the banks, they're not worried about your future. They got paid up front, whether you succeed or fail, whether that degree ever generates value for you. They already got theirs. You know what the most dangerous thing in the world is? Comfort. Not poverty, not failure, comfort. Because comfort is what keeps you trapped in a system that was never designed for you to win. And the ultimate comfort trap is the stable paycheck. I'm going to tell you something that's going to challenge everything you've been taught about work and success. That job you're so grateful for, that steady income you depend on, that direct deposit, that hits your account every 2 weeks like clockwork. It's not security. It's a cage. And most people will spend 40 years inside that cage and never even realized they were trapped. When I was teaching mathematics at MIT and later at Stony Brook, I had everything the middle class dreams about. Tenure, which meant I literally couldn't be fired, health insurance, retirement benefits, a respectable salary, summers off. My parents were proud. My colleagues respected me. I was living the dream, right? Except I wasn't building wealth. I was trading the most valuable, most finite resource I had, my time, for a fixed amount of money that someone else decided I was worth. And here's the thing that nobody tells you about that arrangement. Your value is capped. There's a salary band. There are annual raises of 2 or 3% if you're lucky. It doesn't matter if you're 10 times more productive than your colleague. It doesn't matter if you come up with ideas that transform your field and you get the same incremental increases as everyone else. I watched brilliant professors, people who should have been wealthy based on their contributions to mathematics, science, retire after 40 years with nothing but a modest pension and maybe some savings if they were disciplined. They gave their best years, their best ideas, their creativity, and genius to institutions that paid them a salary and kept all the upside. And they accepted this arrangement because they were taught that this was success. This was what you were supposed to do. Get educated, get a good job, put in your time, retire. But while they were doing that, the administrators above him, the people who couldn't solve differential equation to save their lives, were making twice, 3 times, 5 times as much. Not because they were smarter or worked harder, but because they understood something fundamental about how money works. Here it is. Labor income is linear. Asset income is exponential. When you work a job, you trade hours for dollars on a one-to-one basis. You work 40 hours, you get paid for 40 hours. You want to make more money, you work more hours, or you wait for a raise. But there are only 24 hours in a day and only so many years in your life. You hit a ceiling, it's mathematics. But when you own assets, when you own equity in a business or real estate or intellectual property, your income isn't tied to your hours. It compounds. It grows while you sleep. It leverages other people's time and money and effort. That's how wealth is actually built. I left academia in 1978 to start what would become Renaissance Technologies. People thought I was insane. I was giving up tenure, guaranteed income, the prestige of being a department chair at a major university. For what? To start a hedge fund when I knew nothing about finance. My friends told me I was throwing away my career. But I understood something they didn't. At the university, my income was capped by institutional budgets and salary structures. If I built something I owned, my income was only capped by how well I could execute, and that's exactly what happened. Within a few years, I was making more than I ever could have made in academia. Within a decade, I had generational wealth, not because I worked harder than I did as a professor, but because I had equity. I owned the thing that generated the income. Now, here's where people get defensive. They say not everyone can start a business, not everyone can be an entrepreneur. And that's true, but that's not my point. My point is that if 100% of your income comes from trading, your time for money, you are structurally locked out of wealth creation. You're not even playing the same game as wealthy people. The middle class works for money. The wealthy make money work for them. And the gap between those two approaches isn't small. It's the difference between retiring at 65 with enough to get by and retiring at 50 with more money than you can spend. Let me give you a concrete example. Two people, both smart, both hardworking. Person that gets a good corporate job, starts at $60,000 a year, gets 3% raises annually, maxes out at $150,000 after 25 years. Solid career. Person B takes a lower paying job at a startup, makes $40,000 a year, but gets 2% equity. The startup grows modestly, nothing spectacular, and gets acquired 10 years later for $50 million. Person B's 2% equity is worth $1 million. After taxes, they walk away with maybe $700,000. They just made in 10 years what person A won't make in their entire career. And person B wasn't smarter or luckier. They just understood that equity beats salary every single time. The Stable Paycheck Trap is so effective because it feels responsible. You got bills to pay. You got a family to support. You can't take risks. And so you stay in the job, you take the safe road, you accept the incremental raises, and you tell yourself you're being prudent. But prudence and fear look very similar. What you're really doing is outsourcing your financial future to an employer who will never care about your wealth as much as you do. They'll pay you just enough to keep you showing up and not a dollar more than they have to. And when budget cuts come, or when they can hire someone younger and cheaper, you're gone. That security you thought you had was always an illusion. I'm going to tell you about the day I became a billionaire and what I did next. It wasn't what you'd expect. I didn't buy a yacht or a private jet or a mansion in the Hamptons. You know what I did? I kept driving my Honda Accord, the same car I'd been driving for years, and people thought I was crazy. Here's this guy who just made more money than most people will see in 100 lifetimes, and he's pulling into the parking lot in a car that costs less than most people's annual salary. But I wasn't being cheap. I was being smart because I understood something that most people never figure out. The fastest way to stay poor is to look rich. Let me explain what's happening in America right now. We've created a culture where people measure success by what they consume, not by what they accumulate. You drive through any middle-class neighborhood, and what do you see? Driveways full of $50,000 trucks and SUVs. Garages packed with stuff that hasn't been used in years. Houses that are twice as big as what people actually need. And every single one of those things is financed. People are paying interest on. Depreciating assets, which is mathematically the dumbest thing you can possibly do with money. But they do it anyway because they've been conditioned to believe that spending equals success. Here's the reality. That brand new car sitting in your driveway, the one you're so proud of, started losing value the second you drove it off the lot. In the first year alone, it lost 20 to 30% of its value. You paid $45,000 for it. And 12 months later, it's worth maybe $32,000. You just set $13,000 on fire, and you're paying interest on top of that. If you finance that car at 5% over 6 years, you're paying an extra $7,000 in interest. So that $45,000 car actually cost you $52,000, and it's now worth $32,000. You destroyed $20,000 of wealth in 1 year. And for what? Transportation? You could have bought a $10,000 used car that would have gotten you to the exact same places. But it's not really about transportation, is it? It's about signaling. It's about showing your neighbors and your coworkers and everyone at the traffic light that you've made it, that you're successful, that you're somebody, except you're not. You're broke. You just look successful. And there's a massive difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. Looking wealthy means you have nice things. Being wealthy means you have assets that generate income and appreciate over time. Looking wealthy makes other people rich. Being wealthy makes you rich. I studied patterns my entire career, and the consumption pattern I observed was always the same. People get a raise. They upgrade their lifestyle. Bigger apartment, nicer car, fancier restaurants, designer clothes. Their expenses rise to match their income, sometimes exceed it. They're making more money than ever before, and somehow they have less in savings. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it's a trap that keeps the middle class on a treadmill forever. You work harder to make more money, so you can spend more money. So you need to work harder to make more money. The cycle never ends, and you never build wealth because every dollar that comes in goes right back out. Now, contrast that with how wealthy people think about money. When wealthy people get more income, they don't automatically increase their spending. They increase their investments. They buy assets. Real estate that generates rental income and appreciates over time. Index funds that compound. Businesses that create value. They understand that every dollar you spend is a dollar that can never work for you. But every dollar you invest is a dollar that can multiply. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. Take that $30,000 difference between the new car and the used car. If you invest that $30,000 in a simple index fund averaging 10%, annual returns in 20 years, that money grows to over $200,000. In 30 years, it's over $500,000. One car purchase. The difference between having $500,000 or having nothing. And it's not just cars, it's everything. I watch people finance furniture, finance appliances, finance vacations they can't afford. They're paying interest on things that either depreciate or provide temporary pleasure. Meanwhile, compound interest, the most powerful force in wealth building, is working against them instead of for them. Credit card companies are making fortunes off people who can't delay gratification. The average American household carries over $8,000 in credit card debt at interest rates of 18 to 25%. That interest alone is costing them over $1,000 a year. Money they're just handing to banks for the privilege of spending money they didn't have. Here's what I learned building Renaissance technologies into the most successful hedge fund in history. Wealth isn't built by making a lot of money. Plenty of people make a lot of money and die broke. Wealth is built by keeping what you make and making it grow. That requires discipline that most people don't have. It requires saying no to things you can afford because you understand that affordability isn't the question. The question is whether this purchase moves you closer to or further from financial freedom. A brand new luxury car moves you further away. A rental property moves you closer. Designer clothes move you further away. An investment account moves you closer. The consumption trap is everywhere. It's in every commercial, every Instagram post, every conversation at work where people compare what they bought over the weekend. The entire economy is designed to separate you from your money as efficiently as possible. And it works because most people never learn the difference between assets and liabilities. Assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money out of your pocket. Rich people buy assets. Poor people buy liabilities and think they're assets. There's a game being played all around you every single day, and you're losing at it because nobody ever told you the rules exist. It's not poker, it's not chess, it's the tax game. And while you're sitting there thinking taxes are just something that happens to you, something inevitable like gravity, wealthy, people are using the exact same tax code to pay half, sometimes a third of what you're paying as a percentage of their income. And it's all completely illegal. I'm not talking about hiding money in offshore accounts or some shady scheme that's going to land you in prison. I'm talking about the actual rules written into the tax code by Congress, designed specifically to benefit people who understand how to use them. Let me tell you what happened when I started making real money at Renaissance Technologies. My accountants and tax attorneys sat me down and walked me through something that changed how I thought about income forever. It showed me that not all income is treated equally by the IRS. If you work a job and make $100,000 in salary, you're paying federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare tax. By the time you're done, depending on your state, you might be paying 30, 35, even 40% of that income in taxes. You're taking home $60,000 or $65,000. But if you make that same $100,000 in long-term capital gains from investment you held for more than a year, you're paying 15% federal tax and no payroll taxes. You're taking home $85,000. Same $100,000. $20,000 difference in taxes. Over a career, that difference is millions of dollars. Now here's where it gets interesting. The middle class doesn't know this. They think income is income. They get their paycheck, taxes are already taken out, and they never question whether there might be a better way to structure their financial life. But wealthy people structure everything around this knowledge. They minimize salary and maximize capital gains. They take compensation in stock options that qualify for long-term capital gains treatment. They invest in real estate where they can depreciate the property even while it's appreciating in value, creating paper losses that offset other income. They start businesses where suddenly their car, their home office, their phone, their meal with clients all become legitimate business expenses that reduce their taxable income. I'm not making this up. This is how the system works. The tax code is 75,000 pages long. You think that's an accident? It's complicated on purpose because complexity benefits those who can afford to navigate it. If you're making $50,000 a year, working a regular job, you can't afford to pay a tax attorney fine. $100 an hour to find deduction. But if you're making $5 million a year, spending $50,000 on sophisticated tax planning, that saves you $1 million in taxes is the easiest decision you'll ever make. The tax code is a massive wealth transfer mechanism from people who don't understand it to people who do. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. Two people, both highly skilled professionals. Person A is a top surgeon, makes $700,000 a year in salary, pays federal income tax of 37% on everything above $500,000, and $50,000 state tax of maybe 8%, payroll taxes, all in. They're paying close to 50% in taxes on their top earnings. Takes home maybe $400,000 after taxes. Person B is an investor who makes $700,000 a year in long-term capital gains. Pays 15% federal, let's say 8% state. Takes home roughly $540,000. Same income. Person B keeps an extra $140,000 every single year. Over 20 years, that's almost $3 million in additional wealth. And person B didn't work harder or contribute more to society. They just understood the rules better. Here's another piece most people don't know. The tax code is designed to encourage certain behaviors. The government wants people to invest in businesses, so they make capital gains rates lower than ordinary income rates. They want people to invest in real estate, so they allow a depreciation deduction. They want people to save for retirement, so they make 401k and IRA contributions tax deductible or tax-free. These aren't loopholes. These are intentional policy decisions written directly into the law. But the middle class doesn't take advantage of them because they don't know they exist or they don't understand how to use them. I built Renaissance into the most successful hedge fund in history, partly because I understood that after-tax returns are what actually matter. You can make all the money in the world, but if you're giving half of it to the government when you didn't have to, you're not being smart. We structured our compensation, our investments, our entire operation to be as tax efficient as possible within the bounds of the law. And that's what every wealthy person and every successful business does. They hire experts who live and breathe tax code to find every legal advantage. Now I know what some of you are thinking. This feels unfair. Why should investment income be taxed less than salary? Why should business owners get all these deductions that employees don't get? And you know what? Maybe it is unfair. Maybe the system should be different. But complaining about the system while refusing to learn how it works is just volunteering to pay more than you have to. The rules are the rules. You can either learn them and benefit from them, or you can ignore them and keep getting crushed by them. Let me tell you about the scariest moment of my professional life. It was 1978, and I was walking away from a tenured position at one of the most prestigious mathematics departments in the country. Tenure means you have a job for life. You literally cannot be fired unless you commit some kind of egregious misconduct. I was 39 years old, I had young kids, a mortgage, and I was giving up guaranteed income to start a hedge fund in a field I knew almost nothing about. My colleagues thought I'd lost my mind. My family was worried, and honestly, I was terrified. But you know what scared me more than taking that risk? The thought of being 70 years old, looking back, and wondering what could have been if I just had the courage to try. Here's what nobody tells you about risk. The middle class has been taught that risk is the enemy. Don't gamble. Don't put your money in the stock market. You could lose it all. Don't start a business. 90% of them fail. Keep your money in the bank where it's safe. Get a stable job with benefits. Play it safe. But while you're playing it safe, inflation is quietly destroying your purchasing power. Your savings account earning 1% while inflation runs at 3 or 4% means you're losing 2 to 3% of your wealth every single year. You're not preserving your money. You're watching it slowly evaporate. That's not safety. That's guaranteed loss. Let me show you the math, because math doesn't lie. You've got $100,000 in a savings account earning 1% interest. Feels safe, right? It's FDIC insured. You can access it anytime, no risk, except inflation is running at 3%. After 1 year, you've got $101,000 in the bank, but that money now has the purchasing power of only $98,000 compared to last year. You lost $2,000 of real wealth. After 10 years of this, your $100,000 has grown to about $110,000 in nominal terms, but it has the purchasing power of only $82,000. You lost 18% of your wealth by playing it safe. After 20 years, your supposedly safe nest egg has lost over 30% of its purchasing power. You worked your whole life to save that money, and inflation stole a third of it while you were trying to be responsible. Now compare that to someone who invested that same $100,000 in a diversified portfolio of index funds. Yes, the market goes up and down. Yes, there are scary moments when your account value drops, but over 20 years, the S&P 500 has historically returned about 10% annually. That 100,000 becomes 670,000. Even after adjusting for inflation, you've got real wealth growth of 300 to 400%. The person who took the so-called risk ended up exponentially wealthier than the person who played it safe. That's the paradox. The risky choice was actually the safe choice. The safe choice was actually financial suicide. But the middle class can't see this because they've been conditioned to confuse risk with recklessness. They're not the same thing. Recklessness is taking your rent money to a casino and putting it all on red. Recklessness is investing your life savings in your brother-in-law's cryptocurrency scheme that he doesn't understand. Recklessness is quitting your job with no plan and no savings to chase some vague dream. That's not risk, that's stupidity. Real risk is calculated. It's based on data, on probabilities, on understanding the downside and having a plan for it. Real risk is starting a business with 6 months of savings in the bank. Real risk is investing in yourself by learning a high-value skill. Real risk is putting your money in diversified investments instead of under your mattress. When I started Renaissance, I didn't just wake up one day and decide to throw everything away on a whim. I spent years studying markets, developing mathematical models, and understanding what was possible. I surrounded myself with brilliant people who knew what I didn't know. I went in with a plan, with capital, with a safety net. And even then it was terrifying. The first few years were brutal. We had losses. We had setbacks. There were nights I couldn't sleep wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. But I also knew that the alternative, staying in academia and making a comfortable salary, while watching my best years slip away, that was a guarantee of mediocrity. I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. Here's what I learned about risk over 40 years of beating the market. The biggest risk isn't market volatility or business failure. The biggest risk is inaction. It's staying in a job that's slowly killing your soul because it's safe. It's keeping your money in cash because you're afraid of losing it, while inflation guarantees you will lose it. It's never starting that business or making that investment or taking that leap, because you're waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. Every day you don't take intelligent risks is a day you fall further behind people who do. The wealth gap in this country isn't primarily about income inequality. It's about risk tolerance inequality. Wealthy people are willing to take calculated risks with their time, their money, their careers. They start businesses knowing most businesses fail. They invest in markets knowing markets crash. They bet on themselves knowing they might be wrong. And yes, some of them fail. But the ones who succeed don't just succeed a little bit, they succeed exponentially. Meanwhile, the middle class is sitting on the sidelines, paralyzed by fear, watching opportunity after opportunity pass them by because they're terrified of losing what little they have. I want you to do something right now. Think about yesterday. From the moment you woke up to the moment you went to sleep, where did your time actually go? And I don't mean in some vague sense. I mean literally hour by hour. What did you do? Most people can't answer this question with any precision. They know they were busy. They know they worked hard. They know they were exhausted by the end of the day. But if you actually tracked it, you'd find that massive chunks of time disappeared into activities that created zero value for your future. Commuting, scrolling social media, sitting in pointless meetings, watching television. And here's the brutal truth. Time is the only asset you can never get back. You can always make more money. You can recover from financial mistakes, but you cannot recover time. Once it's gone forever. The middle class is trapped in what I call the time poverty cycle. They're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week at jobs that pay them just enough to cover their bills, but not enough to build real wealth. They're commuting an hour each way, so that's 10 hours a week just sitting in traffic or on trains. They're spending their evenings doing laundry, grocery shopping, cleaning, all the maintenance tasks of life. Their weekends are filled with errands and chores and recovering from the exhaustion of the week. And when do they have time to invest in themselves? When do they have time to learn new skills, to start a side business, to think strategically about their future, to read, to plan, to create? They don't. They're trapped on a treadmill where every ounce of their time and energy goes into just maintaining their current situation. I spent years in academia before I started Renaissance, and I watched this pattern destroy brilliant people. Professors who could have been doing groundbreaking research, spending their time on administrative tasks and committee meetings. Talented mathematicians, burning hours, grading papers, and dealing with university bureaucracy. And they couldn't escape because they needed the paycheck. They had families to support, mortgages to pay. So they kept showing up, kept grinding, kept sacrificing their most productive hours to tasks that someone else deemed important. And at the end of their careers, what did they have to show for it? A pension and some fading memories of work that mattered. When I started my fund, I made a conscious decision that has shaped everything since. I protected my time for deep work, for thinking, for solving the problems that actually mattered. I didn't take every meeting. I didn't respond to every email immediately. I didn't fill my calendar with obligations that looked productive but created no real value. I was ruthless about this because I understood something fundamental. My value wasn't in my labor. Anyone can work hard. My value was in my ability to see patterns others missed, to solve problems others couldn't solve, to think at a level that required uninterrupted focus. And that kind of thinking doesn't happen in the gaps between meetings. It doesn't happen when you're exhausted from a 10-hour workday. It happens when you create space for it. But the middle class has been sold a completely different story. They've been told that busy equals productive, that working long hours shows dedication and commitment, that if you're not constantly hustling, you're lazy. So people wear their exhaustion like a badge of honor. They brag about how little sleep they're getting, how many hours they work this week, how they haven't taken a vacation in years, and they think this makes them virtuous. But all it really means is that they're spending their most valuable asset, their time, in the least valuable way possible. Trading hours for dollars with no leverage, no ownership, no compound effect. Let me show you what this looks like over a lifetime. Person that works 60 hours a week for 40 years. They're dedicated, hardworking, reliable. They make a decent salary, but they're always tired, always stressed, always behind on everything else in their life. They never have time to invest in learning new skills or building something on the side. They retire at 65 with some savings and Social Security. Person B works 40 hours a week, but spends 10 hours a week investing in themselves, learning to code, building a side business, reading, networking, creating. Those 10 hours a week compound over time. The skills they develop open new opportunities. The business they start on the side eventually replaces their job income. They retire at 50 with passive income streams and the freedom to do what they want. Person B didn't work more hours. They worked smarter hours. They invested time instead of just spending it. Here's the trap within the trap. Lifestyle inflation doesn't just eat your money. It eats your time. You buy a bigger house. Now you've got more space to maintain, more yard work, more repairs. You buy nicer things. Now you've got to spend time shopping for them, maintaining them, worrying about them. You move to the suburbs for more space. Now your commute doubles. Every upgrade to your lifestyle comes with a time cost that nobody tells you about, and that time has to come from somewhere. Usually it comes from the time you could have spent building something that matters. I see people in their 40s and 50s who are exhausted, burned out, trapped in jobs they hate, and they can't figure out how they got there. But it's simple. They spent 20 years trading all their time for money without ever investing any of that time in building leverage. They never started the business. They never developed the high-value skill. They never built the investment portfolio. They were too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed by the immediate demands of life to think about the long-term trajectory. There's a secret world that exists all around you, and you can't see it. It's not hidden in some vault or locked behind closed doors. It's hiding in plain sight. It's the knowledge that separates the wealthy from everyone else. And the cruel irony is that this knowledge isn't complicated. It's not advanced calculus or quantum physics. It's basic principles that anyone can understand. Compound interest, leverage, asset allocation, tax efficiency, the difference between good debt and bad debt, how to read a balance sheet, how equity works. But 95% of the population will go through their entire lives without ever learning these things. And that knowledge gap is the reason the wealth gap exists. Let me tell you what happens in wealthy families that doesn't happen in middle-class families. When a wealthy kid is 12 years old, they're sitting at the dinner table hearing conversation about investment strategies, real estate deals, business acquisitions, tax planning. They're learning that debt isn't inherently bad if it's used to buy assets that appreciate. They're learning that you don't work for money, you make money work for you. They're learning about compound interest, and their parents are showing them actual numbers. If you invest $10,000 at age 20 and it grows at 10%. Annually, by age 60, you'll have $450,000. But if you wait until you're 30 to invest that same $10,000, you'll only have $174,000 at age 60. That 10-year delay costs you $276,000. These kids are learning this before they can drive a car. Now let me tell you what happens in middle-class families. Money is either not discussed at all because it's considered rude or uncomfortable, or it's discussed in terms of scarcity and fear. We can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are greedy. The stock market is gambling. The closest thing to financial education most middle-class kids get is being told to save their allowance and maybe open a savings account that earns 0.5% interest. They graduate high school, maybe college, having never learned how a mortgage works, how credit cards actually make money, what a Roth IRA is, how to evaluate whether a job offers actually good compensation. Nothing. And then they're thrown into the real world where every institution is designed to extract money from them, and they have no defenses because nobody ever taught them the rules. I didn't come from wealth. My father was in the shoe business. I grew up in a middle-class family outside Boston, but I had something most people don't have. I had an obsessive need to understand how systems work. When I got interested in markets, I didn't just dabble. I consumed everything I could find. I read academic papers on quantitative finance. I studied probability theory and statistical analysis. I talked to traders and investors and economists. I taught myself things that most people assume you need an MBA to understand, and what I discovered was shocking. The gap between what wealthy people know about money and what everyone else knows isn't small, it's enormous. And it's not because wealthy people are smarter. It's because they have access to different information and different mentors. Here's a specific example. Most middle-class people think debt is bad, period. They've been taught that being in debt means you failed, that you should pay off all debt as quickly as possible, that debt is something to be ashamed of. But wealthy people understand that there's good debt and bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing money to buy things that depreciate or provide no return. Credit card debt to buy clothes, a car loan for a luxury vehicle. That's bad debt because you're paying interest on something that's losing value. But good debt is borrowing money at a low interest rate to buy assets that appreciate faster than the interest rate. If you can borrow money at 4% to buy real estate that appreciates at 7% and generates rental income on top of that, you're not losing money. You're using leverage to accelerate wealth creation. This is how real estate investors build empires. They use other people's money to buy assets, and the assets pay off the debt while appreciating in value. But the middle class doesn't know this, so they avoid all debt, or they only use debt for consumption. They miss out on one of the most powerful wealth-building tools that exist because nobody ever explained how it actually works. And this pattern repeats across every aspect of personal finance. The wealthy understand that you should max out tax advantage retirement accounts first because of the compound effect of tax-free growth. The middle class doesn't even know what a backdoor Roth IRA is. The wealthy understand that you can write off business expenses against your income if you structure things correctly. The middle class thinks deductions are only for rich people. The wealthy understand that the first $100,000 you save is the hardest, but also the most important because that's when compound interest starts to really accelerate. The middle class gives up after saving 10 or 20,000 because they don't see meaningful progress. I built Renaissance technologies into the most successful hedge fund in history by finding patterns in data that other people couldn't see. But the pattern I saw in wealth creation had nothing to do with markets. It was a knowledge pattern. Every single wealthy person I knew, regardless of how they made their money, had deep knowledge about how money actually works. They understood financial statements. They understood risk and return. They understood time value of money. They understood that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow because of what you can do with it. And they applied this knowledge consistently over decades. The middle class makes financial decisions based on emotion and social pressure. Should I buy this house? Well, my friends are buying houses and I don't want to be left behind. Should I lease this car? Well, I deserve something nice and the payment seems affordable. Should I invest in the stock market? I don't know. It seems scary, and I heard someone lost money in the crash.